So, good morning. This is POISE, Sexual Violence Support Group's webinar series, and this is our third webinar on intakes. So, the training that we're doing today is the third part of the POISE series. So, there's going to be two more webinars after the one today. But today's focus is going to be developing and conducting sexual violence support group intakes. And here are our learning objectives for today. First, we're going to define and identify the purpose of a sexual violence support group intake. After that, we're going to reflect on considerations for doing trauma informed intakes before wrapping up the day with outlining some potential questions and structures for doing sexual violence support group intakes. If we have time at the end of our webinar today, which I hope we do, we will practice some of the scenarios for our sexual violence support group. But even if we don't, you all should already have access to a copy of the slides. And I ask that you please not look ahead because we do have some discussion questions and the answers are in the slides. Okay, so first, let's dive into the purpose of an intake for a sexual violence support group. Why do we do them? Why are they important? And how can they help or hurt the survivors we're trying to reach? But before we go there, like we've done in the other two webinars, we're going to briefly review what a sexual violence support group is for those who are joining us for the first time. A sexual violence support group, unsurprisingly enough, is a group that focuses on social relationships, skill development, and healing for people who've experienced sexual violence. The difference between a sexual violence support group and other types of groups is its emphasis on building skills, social skills in particular, and relationships. So, in other states, they might refer to these types of groups as psychoeducational support groups, but they really serve the same purpose. Also, sexual violence support groups are a core service of sexual violence programs, so I'm glad we're going to be discussing some of the pre work to facilitating the group today. Also, as we move through the webinar today, we will continue to refer back to the information about our mock support group. So again, remember, we are doing a support group, and the target audience for our group is an older women in our community. Our main activity is going to be bird watching or birding if you are someone who participates in that activity. And the location for our support group is going to be around our town, right? Because it's going to be outside looking for birds, but most commonly in a park with a pond near the coffee shop. Now, as a reminder, we chose this location because it's outside, it engages with the interests of our target audience, and if there's inclement weather or bad weather, we still are able to go to the coffee shop to hold the group, and it's near the central location where the group will be held. So we're considering transportation needs, we're considering the interests of our target population, and we're trying to make sure that there's easy access to any changes that might need to happen because of the location. So again, our audience is going to be determining the logistics, timing, and support group needs for conducting intakes. Having a support group that focuses on multiple populations can help survivors from many different backgrounds access services, right? So if you want to do an open group, that's great. That removes the barriers of people having to go through a structured process to be a part of a group. But even if we do an open group, we still need to do some type of pre-screening before the group begins. This helps streamline participants and encourage positive group dynamics before people actually attend. you've been doing this work for any amount of time now, you're probably familiar with the idea of an intake. But we want to try to shift our framing to make it more of a conversation, right? And imagining an intake as the beginning of a survivor's healing process. Intakes are a screening tool, right? So that means they do have a use, but they are also our first chance to get to know survivor so we can support their needs and connect them to available resources. We should be doing intakes as a part of a service that we offer because a really good intake doesn't feel like a formal interview with invasive questions at all. Best practices for intakes is that they should be done in a conversation style so that survivors feel open and comfortable to share, knowing that our ultimate purpose as an advocate, as a person there to support, is to help them get support and to find the resources that they need. If we're just asking our yes and no questions, we're just marking off things off our list, and we're not actually listening to what survivors are telling us, we're just going, okay, question 6. Okay, question 7, right? That's not a quality intake. And we need to reevaluate what our process is. And because we might be doing intake so often, and we might do so many, sometimes that purpose might get lost. All in all, sexual violence support group intakes, when done in a trauma informed, curious, and intentional way, can be an effective screening tool, another core service, and a demonstration of us and our advocacy program being predictable, safe, and allowing survivors to make informed decisions for their healing, but specifically about our services. So, if it's all of these things, we can't and should not reduce it as a way to just determine if someone needs shelter or ranks high on a lethality assessment. Oops, sorry, everyone. That skipped ahead a couple slides. There we go. Instead, when we're talking about intakes, this has to be a way for us to engage with survivors for the first time to make them feel supported. If you're looking for more general information on intakes, Anna, I'm sure she's already on it, yep, has put another resource in the chat that can help you with intakes in general. But specifically, we want to make sure that there are intakes for your sexual violence support groups outside of your normal agency intake processes. If intakes are actually done, right, with intentionality and care, they don't have to be a stagnant list of questions to pull information from survivors. Instead, they can be mutually beneficial for the advocate, but also for the survivors as well. For survivors, it allows them to engage with us as the facilitators one on one before they have to do so in a group. It also gives them the opportunity to ask questions, to explore the place or platform. And so we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but it's suggested that the place that you do your intake is either in a secure location, like your office, if you have one, or in the place that the support group is going to be held. So for us, we would probably do it in the coffee shop or outside in the park. Outside in the park might not be as confidential, especially if it's one on one, because other people could see us. But that is a way that we can show people and they can explore the space before the group even starts, and they have the added pressure of meeting new people as well. They also allow survivors to talk about their experience individually with the facilitators, again, before they have to be exposed to new people. Explain potential issues or concerns. So, for our support group, because we're working with older women, one of a concern could be I have to use the restroom frequently. I don't want to disturb the group. They can let us know that beforehand, and we can problem solve about the best way for them to still take part and take care of their medical issues while participating. It's also a way for us to discuss goals and expectations, discuss any relationships to group participants, and inquire about resources. In particular, when we're talking about relationships, that's what a sexual violence support group is all about. So, if there are things that we can know beforehand that might affect the dynamics, that would be beneficial for us and the survivor to know because that can allow them to make the best choice about participation and us to figure out if this support group is the right support group for them at this point in time. Doing this work again for intakes is also a way for us to help reduce anxiety for survivors who might feel that pressure when doing things for the first time or meeting new people and talking about their trauma for the first time. For facilitators, it allows us to be able to explain the basics about our agency and policies and to have an initial meeting without the pressure of others in the group. When we have intakes, this allows us to explain confidentiality in our agency policies, to give out the logistical information about the group, to screen for the survivor's needs, to assess potential issues that participants might be bringing. So, for example, someone might say, "Oh, I forgot to say it in our earlier, but I have issues driving, or it's really hard for me to drive at night." That could be a potential issue for our group depending on when the time of the group is, right? So, all different types of issues, whether those internal to the survivor or external to the other participants. Discuss goals and objectives for the groups and assess the participants. It's the initial point to connect survivors with resources and help ensure group compatibility. It also allows for facilitators to screen for survivors' needs and to flag any conflicts that they might see with the participants attending the group. So, all that is to say that intakes are just like any other tool. The utility and the usefulness in them is going to be from how we use them. Now, let's focus on some best practices for doing intakes. How can we make this feel less like an interview and more like a relationship building conversation? So, the first thing that we want to realize, and if you get nothing else out of our time together today, we want to realize that yes, intakes are a screening tool, which means that some people might be screened out. But on that same point, intakes are not foolproof. We might be able to use them to find some important or major themes, but some strengths, some issues, or resources and needs won't be revealed in a 1 hour conversation. That's not possible to catch it all, and that's okay. Also, when we're talking about screening people, we may need to change our mindset from screening and including as many people in instead of focusing on screening them out. And I think for me personally, when I stop thinking of resources as ours, or we only have a little bit of resources and we have to give it to the person who's most fitted, instead of we have an abundance of time and resources and we have an abundance amount of support to provide, when I shifted my mindset from something that I own into something for survivors and necessary for them, that helped me. I also want to note that just because someone might have trouble coping or might be triggered by a question that we ask in the intake or anything else that might make them seem quote unquote difficult does not mean that we refuse to give them support. As advocates, and particularly as sexual violence advocates, we have to recognize trauma responses as that trauma responses. And we need to be prepared to have resources ready to offer to support when that happens. So they might need additional resources and the support group for their healing journey. And that's okay too. And so I want to be very, very, very clear that just because a person might need more help does not mean we necessarily screen them out of the support group. And at the same time, we can suggest resources that are helpful to people. And it is our responsibility to maintain the safety and a safe space for everyone who attends the group while balancing the individual needs of participants. And that includes participants whose behavior is continuously disruptive and harmful to the group. So that means, right, I spent all that time telling you all to screen people in, but I also recognize that everyone may not be the best fit of your support group at that time. But there are some, and because of that, there are some factors that might make someone not ready to pretend to attend your particular support group. Some of these issues might be they may not actually want to share in a group setting, but they still want support. Or maybe they're not a part of the target audience for the group, right? So for our group, if someone was a young man who was not interested in being outside, they might not be the best fit for our support group. But there are other ways that our agency can still support them through our advocacy work and our sexual violence services. Another concern might be if they have significant confidentiality concerns or they might be related to another person in the group that or the person that sexually assaulted someone else in the group is related to them. This could be a reality in rural communities, so it's just something that we want to flag and look out for. Again, does not mean someone is automatically disqualified from attending, but we want to be aware of that. These are some different valid concerns that our support group might not be the best place for someone. And just because we think someone isn't the best fit for our group right now doesn't mean they won't ever be, or that there isn't other type of support available for them that might be a better fit. Additionally, we have to realize that survivors who are attending support groups have to be at a certain point in their healing journeys. So, a facilitator who's been running a support group in Washington who previously did a webinar on support group facilitation said that their standard was a year after the experience occurred, but I think it's a little bit more fluid than that. Still, right? The survivor needs to have made some progress on their healing journey so that they are not re-traumatized in every group discussion that we will have. Because it's natural in a sexual violence support group that someone might talk about their experience. So we don't want to cause more harm to a person being in our support group. If someone has just freshly experienced their trauma, they might benefit more from one on one therapy and one on one advocacy. So, if we're conducting the screening as a part of our intake conversation, what are we looking for? In our screening, we should be looking for places or areas where someone needs support. So, not just the ones that in the support that we can offer, but other places where they can find help and resources in the community, but also places of support in their lives. Some of these places might be support we can give through our agency and our advocacy. So, for example, some of you might have transitional housing programs at your agency. This might benefit someone, and this might come up as a need that they have in your intake conversations. Connections outside of the group, resources that we might know of in the community. So, we might say, hey, I heard you say that you're looking for a part time job. These are some places that I know are hiring because you mentioned that you have skills in administrative work. This could be questions that they might have, why they want to participate in the group, and support that they might need for the group. And when we're talking about questions, this could be questions that you have about other participants, our services, that if I have about how the group is going to run, it's going to depend on that particular person. And while we want to be open and honest, we shouldn't disclose any information about the others, people – doing intakes outside of our agency. So even though we want this to be a conversation, if we hear an area of support while the person's speaking, we just might want to make a note and jot that down and then ask them about it when they're done speaking or at the end of our intakes as we're wrapping up. Something else we might want to do is while they're starting to share, let them know, hey, if you see me start to write notes down, I can even share them at the end. I just want to make sure that I'm keeping track of the things that you're sharing with me so I can support you in the best way possible. It's also important to note that none of the things that we're talking about in the what are we searching for section should advantage or disadvantage anyone from participating independently. Collectively, we might decide, hey, they are a good fit, or not right now, but none of these should be considered on their own. Everything within context. We're also screening for things outside of the group that could potentially harm participants and disrupt the group, from things that come along with the participants' individual experiences to other factors. So, some of these things could be confidentiality concerns and safety issues, and compatibility with other group members. For example, this could be things like my partner is tracking where I am, or I don't have transportation, or I have a health condition that makes it difficult for me to walk. Now, remember, for our support group, our main activity is going to be birding. So, some of the things that we're doing will require them to be able to walk outside or be able to be mobile outside. If they're not able to do that, they may not be the best fit for our group right now unless we have a way to support them. Additionally, as a group facilitator, what we're screening for is potential issues that can be caused to the group due to differences of opinion, experiences, personality, communication styles, and other factors. While facilitators shouldn't prevent and can't prevent all disagreements, because we need to all learn how to respectfully communicate, we should be aware of some flag some things as triggers. So, and know what behavior might potentially clash within the group that can cause something to go from a disagreement to an argument. And on that same note, we want to make sure that we're thinking about how to solve for these potential issues, including planning on how to respond to conflict in the group, stop a discussion, and how we're going to co facilitate with the other facilitator if an issue arises. Instead of stopping at, it's a problem, I don't think this is going to work. No, we want to think about how can we overcome, accommodate, and then get them into the group as a yes. If we do our due diligence, we've thought through every situation, we're still not comfortable with it, then we should clearly communicate that to the survivor and respectively move on. We also want to screen for internal factors or things that are going on in the survivor's lives so we can know what might affect their individual participation in our group. That might include background and nature of their sexual violence experience, the coping mechanisms that they use, if they have any triggers that they're aware of, suicidality, and mental and behavioral health concerns and resources. We need to screen in a style that matches the population that we're serving and take into account how someone's background and identity might affect this conversation. We wouldn't screen a teen with a developmental disability the same way we would screen a deaf adult. That's because they have different backgrounds and identities that affect what they might need. Again, screening, not a catch all, but it can help people access services and find different supports that they might need and maybe some that they're not even aware of. And on the chance that someone, while speaking with us, discovers something about themselves, we need to be able to set up a different time to offer them support. So, for example, someone's talking to us and they say, well, I'm dealing with this issue. and it affects my ability to get to the support group. While we might want to focus on how that might impact the support group and the process we're going through right now, we should be flagging that in our notes and make a point to come back to it at the end of our conversation and set up additional time if the survivor wants to address that issue. It always comes back to yes, we're doing intake, but we want to prioritize survivors' needs above all else. And when we're asking about suicidality, mental health, and coping mechanisms, the point is not to pass judgment. This is so we have information, again, to make sure that we can maintain safety and support for everyone attending the group. Okay, so now let's transition into some general best practices for intakes. Each organization is going to have its own individual intakes, but there are some best practices that can lessen the negative experiences around intakes. Sexual violence support group intakes should be outside of our regular agency intakes with different documentation and questions. And so, like I said before, our support groups need to be different because we're going to be screening for different things than we might for our normal agency intakes. If we're going to do a closed support group, like the one that we've been using as our example with the bird watching group, our support group screening should be a more exclusive standard than the ones that we're using for our sheltering intakes or our other services. If possible, intake should also be conducted by both of the support group facilitators to jumpstart that trust building process and to increase familiarity before the group even starts. Additionally, if possible, we want to start doing intakes between 4 and 6 weeks before we launch the group. This will give us a chance to screen everyone, make the decisions that we need to about who will attend, and then also find resources for those who are going to attend and not, and communicate that decision in a trauma informed way. So let's go back to when we had our first webinar about the planning series and think about our overall support group timeline. So we want to start planning our support group 6 to 9 months before our launch date. Then we want to start doing outreach 3 to 6 months before our start date. And then our intakes 4 to 6 weeks. And it's okay if our outreach and our intake timelines overlap and intersect a little bit. And that would make sense because if we're doing outreach, people might want to, as we're doing outreach, people might sign up to do an intake. And people will probably want to do an intake because of the outreach that we do. So again, when we have a timeline of 4 to 6 weeks to do intakes, this will allow us to schedule multiple appointments. People can cancel and then still allow people flexibility and time to accommodate their schedules to do our intakes. We also want to think about the best practice to do a support group. And like I said before, this is at a place where the support group will be held. That increases familiarity with the place. So we're going to be doing it at the coffee shop. It will allow them to see kind of who works there, what's the selection of food that they might have, if they have any allergies in the space, where the bathroom is, right? Again, to decrease some of that feelings of anxiety and not in the unknown that might come with going to a new place. We also want to make sure that we're using a mix of long and short answer questions. If we're asking just a mix of long answer questions, people might feel fatigued by the time we get to the end. If we're just asking short answer questions, then we won't get the information that we need or have the context to make informed decisions about who should attend. So a mixture of both is preferred. So here's an example from our mock bird watching support group that puts into action some of the best practices we just reviewed. Raina left a message for one of the facilitators, Jordan, asking about the support group. When Jordan called them back, They explained that to participate, they would need to have a conversation about the group before it started. The conversation to take around 45 minutes. Jordan offered to meet Raina at the coffee shop, where the group would be held when the weather was bad, or at the advocacy program's outreach office. Raina chose to do it at the outreach office because it was closer to her home. And there's a lot of different things that we can pull from this example, but we wanted to make sure in this example that we weren't using jargon, right? So we know what intakes are, but other people who don't do this work might not be familiar about why an advocacy program might be doing an intake. We set clear expectations and respectful boundaries in our first conversation. We gave them clear choice points about where the support group could happen, and they were both verbalized. And we demonstrated active listening by responding to the choice that the survivor identified. So because the survivor wanted to attend, do the intake at the place that was closest to our house, that was where we did it. We didn't. There were clearly defined choices, and we made our decision based on their answer. Some other best practices that we want to think about are how to balance documentation and note taking with confidentiality for a survivor. Now, we know documentation about our service provision is essential to grant writing and record retention. So we should be writing something information down for um, to meet confidentiality obligations. But the information that we should be writing down needs to be factual and necessary to providing the information for the survivors. What that means is that we want to remember we as advocates have an obligation to hold records for at least 7 years. And if this information that we wrote down on our intake could be subpoenaed in court, we do not want that information to unintentionally be harmful to survivors. So we just want to be aware of that. And if you have questions about confidentiality and privilege for victim counselors in Iowa, please get in touch with our training team and they can help you with that. Anytime we ask someone to recount their trauma can also be really difficult. So we also want to keep that in mind, especially if this might be the first, second, third, and so on and so forth time processing their trauma, right? Especially if they're going to be doing it with other people who've experienced something similar. So we need to be as advocates prepared for a variety of reactions and emotions and be able to support people going through that. Whether someone's giggling, whether they give us one word answers, whether they are really excited at the beginning, but at the end they're in tears, right? We want to make sure that we prepare to respond to how survivor might respond to the questions that we're asking. Also, if we're going to be asking questions about suicidality, self harm, and other coping mechanisms, we need to be prepared for those answers and be ready to provide resources. So now we're going to focus on how to do intakes. But we're about at our halfway point. So I want to make sure that I'm stopping now to answer any questions that people might have. And if you have any questions during the webinar, please make sure to put them in the Q&A box. I'm going to check now and just give people a moment to see if they have any questions.
There are no questions in the chat, lashae, or in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Anna. Okay, if that changes, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and Anna is going to be monitoring our chat. All right, so we do have our first discussion question for our webinar. And please, again, put these answers in the chat, and then Anna will read them out loud. What are some questions that you might want to ask as a part of your sexual violence support group intake? What are some questions you might want to ask as a part of your sexual violence support group intake?
We have somebody in the chat put, do you feel comfortable sharing with the group?
Absolutely, right? For any type of support work we're doing, that's going to be probably an essential part of the activities. What else? And this is not a trick question. We'll go over some questions, but I just want to see what you all think. All right, we're gonna keep going, but thank you for that person who asked. That's a great key question to ask, right? Are you comfortable with doing one of the key things in a support group? If they're not, this might not be the type of service that they need at this point, and that's okay. We refer them to other services, other resources, and still make sure they get the support that they need. So, before a support group even starts, I'm sorry, and before an intake even starts, we want to make sure that we have some context around the how to's, right? Before the group even starts, we want to make sure that survivors feel comfortable communicating with us and doing the intake. And a lot of that comes with how we frame it. So before we do the intake, we want to make sure that survivors understand the purpose. We want to convey what an intake even is, why we're taking the time to do it, and why we're asking the specific questions that we are. If we're planning on taking notes, we want to be upfront about that and maybe even offer to let the survivors see the notes that we're taking if possible. We also want to make sure that the place that we are doing the intake is quiet and as confidential as possible. And we also want to make sure that we explain our role as advocates. Survivors of sexual violence are often concerned about being judged by others, and the facilitators should take time to explain our role as being a non as our role of being a non-judgmental support figure who have experience with disclosures of sexual violence. We don't want to just verbalize these things either. We want to make sure that the background and of the experience that that person might bring into the room, right? So that might be what religion or faith practice they may have, their personality, right? And how that might affect um, their views or even our views on their experience of sexual violence. In everything that we do, we want to make sure that we refrain from from judging and focus on providing that support that a person might need. Now, again, here's an example of our mock bird watching support group of what the interaction immediately before a sexual violence intake can look like. My name is Jordan, and I will be one of the facilitators. It's nice to meet you. Part of my goal today is to ask you questions and provide you with information about the group. It's also a way for me to get to know you and see what other kind of support might be available. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions today. Feel free to share as much or as little as you would like. Some of these questions might seem a little personal, but they will help me connect you with the resources you might need. I will be taking some notes on your answers, but I won't share them with anyone but my co-facilitator. So this model gives us an example of the facilitator introducing themselves explaining what an intake is and the purpose of it without using jargon, providing context for the questions that they might ask, and starting to introduce their agency's confidentiality policies, and attempting to de stress the situation and alleviate tension and anxiety. The only thing missing about what's in this example is about how long the intake should take. Typically, a sexual violence intake can take anywhere between 45 minutes and an hour and a half, depending on how the conversation goes. And here are some best practice strategies for things to do during an intake. You want to make sure that we're prioritizing survivors' requests for more information and other needs during the intake, right? So we'll have our list of questions, but it's okay and let them know it's okay for them to interrupt with questions that they have of their own or things that they want to share. We want to be mindful of our word choice and our language, be prepared for any type of emotion. We don't want to change the type of language survivors use, but we want to mirror the terms that they use as appropriate, right? So someone might describe something like, yeah, my play brother is the one who sexually assaulted me, for example, right? And we might say, like, okay, so how did that experience with your play brother affect you now, right? We might not, in that moment, we might not say, oh, the survivor said that someone close in their life sexually assaulted them, or say, like, what's a play brother? If we've built up that rapport with that person and we don't understand, we should listen to what they said, make sure they're finished, and then we can ask, I've never heard the term play brother. What does that mean? Right? Making sure we're being respectful and um, understanding the context of what's being shared. We want to encourage survivors to take their time, and if they need to take a break, that is perfectly okay. And if possible, we also want to make sure that we're providing them with the intake questions before the intake even starts. So whether that is like through an email or some other way, if we can give them the questions, that's the best practice. During the conversation, we also want to make sure that we're able to reemphasize things we previously told the survivor and also to ourselves in our own internal dialogue. We also need to make space for survivors to tell us their stories as authentically and emotionally as they need to. And as they're sharing, make sure we are thanking them for their openness and acknowledging their resiliency. And during our intake, when we're asking questions, we also want to keep in mind, why are we asking the questions that we're asking? Is the information that we're gathering going to help us plan and ensure that the group will be a safe place for survivors? And what is the purpose of the questions that I'm asking? If we're unsure of the purpose, then we probably should not be asking those questions. Or if the reason that we're asking those questions is just for the sake of having information, then we also probably shouldn't be asking those questions. So here's an example of some things to say during an intake. The support group will primarily focus on bird watching, which means we will spend most days outdoors. When it's too cold, we will begin meeting at the coffee shop across the street from the pond. I heard you say your car gives you trouble when it rains. We have bus vouchers if that's helpful, or we can arrange transportation for you through our agency. We can also assist you with your arthritis medication so you can hold your binoculars and participate without pain. Do you have any questions before we really dive in? Now, in this example, we consider the facilitator was being proactive with sharing information in the context that we have, was providing the logistics and the backup plans for the support group, and demonstrating that they're listening and looking for places that they can offer support and remove barriers that were connected to attending the support group, but not exclusive to it, right? So their arthritis is not just exclusive to holding binoculars. It probably affects them in other places in their life. But active listening will help us find those different places to support. Okay, so we have our second discussion question. What are some supportive things that you can do during an intake so that you're being empathetic and you're practicing empathetic and active listening? What are some things you can do?
We have someone that said eye contact to show active listening.
hmm Eye contact is very helpful. And just remember that, especially in different rural communities, eye contact can be is not always continuous. Eye contact is not always favored. So just be aware of that and know the practices of the communities that you're in. Absolutely, though. Thank you so much for sharing. What else?
If you notice they are having a hard time, asking them if they need to take a moment.
hmm Acknowledging what's going on, what you observe, and making space for them to take a break or take a moment, take a second. Absolutely. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. We're going to move on to the second question. What are some things you can say when there is silence, the other person seems nervous, to restart the conversation, give the other person space, or if they are questioning their answers? So you don't have to give an example for each one, but what are just some things that you can say if any number of these things are happening? I'm asking you all because I know that you all are very skilled and intelligent and great advocates. So I think that you could have answers to share with the other attendees on the webinar today. What are some things you can say or do in these situations? Okay. So so some of your homework, not really homework, but something I'd like you all to take time to think about is what are some things that you would say or do in these situations? Because these are going to be things that come up as you're facilitating a support group. They'll just naturally happen. So it's important that we think about and plan to respond to these things. So naturally, again, when we're meeting with a new person, there might be some awkwardness and there might be an ebb and flow to a conversation. However, advocates need to be skilled in creating space, restarting conversations, and at the same time, being okay with silence to allow survivors to think, reflect, and to process. So these are some example of prompts that you can use for conversations. What are you thinking about? Does that make sense? Or should I say it in a different way? Do you want to take a break? I'm not looking for the right answer. I'm looking for your answer. We can move at your pace. I'm not in a hurry. as a reminder, right, active listening isn't passive, right? And isn't just an interview, it's a discussion between two or more people. So all types of communication, like we just talked about, is going to be key in helping us be able to make someone comfortable while doing an intake. So now we're at the part that I hope you all are interested in, which is the actual intake questions. So Anna is going to, if she hasn't already, put a sample list of intake questions in the chat that you all can use for your sexual violence support group intake. But again, these are sample questions. So we want to make sure that before we use them, we consult with our organizational leadership before putting them into practice. And the language that's used is reflective of how your community thinks about sexual violence. The rest of our structured webinar for today will cover each of these questions, along with some verbal prompts and context that we will provide, which you can adapt to make it best fit how you communicate, how you talk, and the intake questions that you ask. The sample intake questions are broken up into the following sections: context and basic information, background and experiences, mental and behavioral health, coping and healing, participant goals, needs, and concerns, frequently asked questions, logistics, and wrap up. We and I chose this structure because pieces of it were researched and peer reviewed as questions to be a part of a sexual violence support group intake. They get enough information to facilitate a safe space for everyone involved without being invasive. They leave clear spaces for short answer questions and long answer questions to not overwhelm people, but also for us to have the information again that we need to provide support. And they allow the facilitators to be curious, yet remain confidential and private as needed to interact with survivors. So for most of the screening questions that I cited exactly where I got them from in the Power of Social Connection on the slide. And you can also, again, check out the Circle of Hope from WICSAP that has a shortened section for pre-screening questions. So first, we have our context and basic information. I might say something like, these next few questions will help me learn a little bit more about you and your experiences with support groups. Why do you want to join the support group? And have you participated in a sexual violence support group? And if so, what was that experience like? And so for the second question in particular, that can be helpful in gauging prior experiences and knowledge of support groups and what experience they're coming in with. This can shift the dynamics of a group if someone has expectations based on their prior experiences doing something similar. Another question that's not on the slide, that's really a part of some of the things that you do before anything else is asked, is how do you feel about doing this intake with me today? Right off the bat, voicing their feelings around just doing the intake will help address some of the underlying emotions that might come up later in the discussion. And the earlier we can put a survivor at ease with talking to us, the better it will be for the intake and for the support group overall. It can also give us some time and space to reiterate some of the things that we already did when we first spoke to the survivor. Next, we have the background experiences. And so we want to be mindful that anytime we ask questions about sexual violence, people might be triggered or emotionally activated. So we want to be conscious of this, be aware of where that discussion is being had, and have some grounding tools ready should they need them. I might say part of the reason we're meeting today is for me to learn more about you, your experiences, and how these things have impacted your life. Talking about these things will help me find out whether our group may be a good fit right now and about other ways to support you. The questions that in this section are: have you experienced sexual violence? And how do you feel the sexual violence you experience has impacted your life? Now, again, those are the questions that are in the sample intake that we gave you. But for that first question, have you experienced sexual violence? I might say, would you mind sharing more about the experiences that have brought you here today, or why you want to join a support group? Or what does sexual violence mean to you? And after they've shared, ask them, is this something that you've experienced in your life? We want to make sure that we were being very particular about our word choice and use language that is validating and not blaming, but it's also clear and concise with what we mean. For that second question, how do you feel about this? How do you feel that sexual violence has impacted their lives? We want to make sure that we might say, have someone in your that you know experienced sexual violence. This would help us and potentially the survivor recognize how someone else's experience also impacted their life, and how, even though they may not be the primary survivor, they were still affected by sexual violence that happened, right? And again, as organizations, we also need to be providing support for secondary survivors. Another thing that I might note or do when asking this question is to give them the worksheet that Anna is going to share, if she hasn't already put it in the chat. And she's on it, she did, right? So this is the area of hurt and healing worksheet from the resource sharing project. And on that worksheet, there's a picture of the different areas around a cactus, right? And different branches of the cactus have one of the different areas. And so when I'm asking this question, I might ask them, how has sexual violence impacted your health? How has sexual violence impacted your spirituality? And go through each of those areas of the chart instead of them just having to think about, oh, it's impacting me in this way, in this way, in this way, and having none of the different prompts that might be helpful in moving through the conversation. Now, even if we're going to take that approach, I wouldn't write down everything that they say. I might just make a note like affected in their body, health, right? Keep it very general because, again, we do need to document things, but we need to be mindful of how we do so. The next set of questions about their mental and behavioral health. And these are going to be really important because while psychoeducational support groups can help improve someone's mental health, it's also important that the group is not presented as a therapy group, and it should not be treated as one by the participants. Many people who experience things like what you just described to me have many different types of reactions, which is normal. Some people describe struggles with depression, anxiety, and other mental health related concerns. So the questions are: have you experienced mental health or emotional struggles yourself throughout your life? And how have you dealt with them in the past? Instead of just reading that question out loud, I might say, have you experienced mental health or emotional problems or issues in your life? And what happened or what did you do to get through them? And then after they share, I might say, thank you for sharing that with me. When you experience um, issues with eating, like whatever they said, what did you do to get through that? Or what did other people help you do to get through that? Now, again, just because someone discloses mental health struggles or suicidality or they're using substances or self harm, that does not automatically disqualify someone from participating in a support group, especially if they have established those things as coping skills. On their own, these things should not be automatic disqualifiers, especially when so many survivors deal with them. Prior to offering support groups, our agency should have a plan and clear guidance in place for how to address survivors who express wanting to harm themselves, right? And if we don't, that's something that you should get in touch with the Iowa CASA training department to help you develop. It's also important to be mindful of this section and know that this part of the interview is going to be lengthy And we'll probably ask people uncomfortable questions that are still necessary for us to know to, again, have a safe space for the support group. The power of social connection says it is common for survivors of sexual violence to experience a wide range of emotions and personal reactions to their survivorship. And it is absolutely critical to gain a better understanding of this, a better understanding of mental health concerns someone might bring into the support group setting. So, as always, we should offer support and we should also have targeted resources available for mental and behavioral health issues. We also want to make sure that we're identifying and assessing the coping skills and mechanisms that survivors already have coming into the group. Again, we're not here to pass judgment on how someone has survived to this point. So it's not about good or bad, right or wrong, or positive or negative. Rather, it's about highlighting what pushes them and what helps them to survive. As I mentioned, groups can come at a time. Come, as I mentioned, support groups at times can become overwhelming and intense. I want to learn more about how you navigate that and think about how I might be able to support you in a group setting. Do you have a therapist? And if so, how long have you been seeing them? So out loud, I might rephrase some of these questions like 6 and 7, 6 being if something is overwhelming you or becoming too stressful, how do you know? And what activities help you relieve stress to be who is your support group? What do you do when you're stressed out or you need help? And if you need help outside the group, I would like to make sure that you have time to support. So who do you lean on when you need help, when you want to have fun, and other ways that people have determined what helps them, what is support for them. A variety of coping mechanisms can be helpful to the group because there might be room for some peer modeling, right? So we as facilitators will not be the only ones sharing knowledge. That's why we have support groups because it's a group of their peers who can help them in ways that we might not be able to relate. We also want to be conscious in doing our intake of two people who might have similar triggers, feeling re traumatized, being in such close proximity to someone else, or how they might be able to learn from the other person and make a connection that benefits their lives. Either way, it's something to flag. So if you were here in part one, there was a video that was shown about a man who attended a support group and how he was inspired by someone else was able to share their experience so easily, right? So that could be something that's helpful, but we also want to be aware of where that dynamic might also be harmful. This is also a place to note that if they express interest in building their coping skills and make a note of which coping skills those are. And so if you have the sample intake that we put in the chat already pulled up, this is about halfway through those preset questions. And so when we get to this point, it might be helpful to pause asking questions and ask them how they're feeling, letting them know that they're about halfway through the intake, and asking them if they want to continue. Again, when we do this, we're modeling proactively sharing information, verbally um, making it very clear about what choices that can be made, and we're checking in with them throughout the intake. And then we move on to discussing participants' goals and concerns. Now, in reality, these should be sprinkled in throughout, and it might be helpful to start a conversation actually here to alleviate some of the confusion, anxiety, or just answer questions a survivor might have outright. So I might say something like, now, I want to spend some time talking about the support group and what you might need to participate. What are your goals for participating in the group and what do you want to gain? What do you need to participate? What concerns do you have about participating in the group, if any? And are there any barriers you know of that might prevent you from attending the group? So again, this should really be a conversation And we should be listening to survivors and seeing if and how we can make the group compatible with their needs. And so if while they're talking, they have identified that for our support group that they might need help reading the guide, the bird guide that we have, when we get to the part about what do they need to participate, we can say something like, I heard you say that you have issues reading. Would you like to see if we can help you get some new glasses? Or would it be helpful if you have someone partner with you in reading the guide? Right? So, not making them repeat themselves, but show that we're active listening. Now, though this set of questions is towards the end, this is probably some of the pieces that we want to make the most notes on that are not a part of the preset questions. So knowing the goals and wants of potential participants and seeing how they align with the purpose and focus of our group should be one of the main qualifiers in determining who is participating in this support group. Is what they want something that can happen within the group, and is what they need something that we can accommodate? If it's not, that's okay. We just need to find a different space for them. And the next few questions are focused on how someone learns and likes to engage and connect with others. What helps you learn? What's your learning style? How can facilitators best support you during group sessions? What should we do? And what are some things we should not do? And how do you like to express yourself? For example, are you someone who's very creative and artistic? Do you like to write? Do you like to do activities and practice? What are some ways that you like to engage? Now, for our mock group, we might already have a little bit of context about how they like to express themselves, but we might want to ask about more specific activities as a part of bird watching, right? So, for example, do you like to create bird houses? Do you like to map out the routes? Do you like to purchase seeds? Do you have a favorite type of bird, right? So, making sure that we're investing in whatever the main topic, theme, or activity is for our support group. If we have a less specific topic, then we can ask just these more general questions that are asked in number 16, which is how do you like to express yourself? For example, through discussion, art, activities, music, and so on. And finally, we have our frequently asked questions. I might say that wraps up the formal questions we have. Before we end today, I want to make sure you have an opportunity to ask questions and get any clarification you might need. What questions do you have? When we're doing this and we're wrapping up, we want to make sure to answer questions about logistics, location, time, and materials that they might need to participate, provide a timeline for follow up and resources, and give group documents to reference. So if you have group agreements that you're going to start with, the flyer again, your business card, this might be some of those things. And again, provide our contact information for ourselves, but also for our agencies. So we've discussed the things that we should do before, the stuff we should do during, the questions, but now let's focus on after the intake. So we want to make sure that when we are, after the intake has finished, we are thanking people for their time and then again, providing them for a timeline for follow up. And this can sound like, so you might not hear from me for 2 weeks because we're doing all of our intakes and finishing up our outreach, but we will be in contact by email or phone or however they identify they like to be in contact. After that, we want to provide information about how we'll be in contact. And then after that, we want to make sure we do our follow up about whether or not they are, whether or not, even we want to make sure we're doing follow up if they are accepted or even if they're not a part of the group. If they are going to be a part of the group, great. We want to make sure that we're providing them with the logistical information, answering the FAQs that they might need for need to know information. And we want to send them reminders a couple of times so that they can have it and attend the group with no issues. We also still want to follow up with people if they're accepted, with some things that we notice in the intake or requests that they might have for support. If they're not accepted into the group, we need to let them know in an empathetic yet firm and trauma informed way. We should let them know that this does not mean that they can't get any other type of support, or we're not here to still help them find support that they need. It also doesn't mean that they can't ever participate in our support group or another group. A part of letting them know that they were not accepted is to recommend other types of services and supports, but we need to, again, do this empathetically. A tip for facilitators is to be clear about the purpose of the group and pair this conversation with the other options for survivors. So participants should clearly know after talking to you whether or not they're in the group, what their available options are, and what other resources are available. We also want to let them know that this is not a rejection of their personality or their experience, and encourage them to participate at other types of groups of support that are available and exist at our program and others that are available, and also online. And so, to be clear, everyone may not be a good fit for the group, and that is okay. But at the same time, just because someone might need more support does not make them unfit for a support group. They might just need more support. Regardless of if they're accepted or not, we need to have a variety of resources and referrals available. And even more so if we determine that they are not the best fit for this support group right now. We should never come to that decision lightly. However, if we do, resources need to be provided. Okay, so the last piece of our webinar today is going to be doing some scenario work. So there will be 3 scenarios of people wanting to join our support group, right? And based on the information provided through polls, you will determine if they are a good fit for our mock support group. So I will bring up the scenario, I will ask you a question, and then you will select the answer in the poll. Okay, so scenario A. After your intake with Ariel, she calls your work phone, slurring her words. She tells you that she really needs the support group and that, quote, she can't wait to tell everyone else how to heal, unquote. Based on this information, do you think she's a good fit for your support group? I'll read it again. After your intake with Ariel, she calls your work phone, slurring her words. She tells you that she really needs a support group and, quote, she can't wait to tell everyone else how to heal, unquote. Based on the information, do you think she's a good fit for the group? And so I'm going to launch the poll now. And the options are, based on this information, do you think she is a good fit for your sexual violence support group? And the options are yes, maybe, and no. I'm sorry that the second answer says may, but it's supposed to be maybe. Yes, maybe, no. Okay, we're about 42% participated, so I'm going to wait till we get a little bit higher. Based on the information provided, do you think she's a good fit for your support group? Okay. So it looked like everyone said maybe. And for what we know here, we would say yes, right? She has expressed a need in the interest, right? While on the call, we might want to let her know that we're observing and offer support. So I might say, "Hi Ariel, I noticed that you're slurring. Are you okay? Do you need help?" And then let her go from there. We should also remind her that the purpose of the support group and that everyone has their own experience. So remind her that we're not here to tell people what to do. I don't tell you what to do, but what we're here is to offer support, share what we've done, and see what help other people need. So we might just need to redirect that enthusiasm. And we also don't want to assume why she's slurring. She could be having a stroke. She could be just tired, or there might be another factor, but we never want to assume. And those things should not prevent her from accessing services. All right, so that's kind of the flow of how the other ones are going to go as well. So I'm going to read um, another example. While doing an intake with Bonnie, she struggles to answer your questions. She tells you that she doesn't like thinking about what happened to her and doesn't think she will ever be ready to share with the group. Based on this information, do you think she's a good fit for your support group? I will read it again. Scenario B. While doing an intake with Bonnie, she struggles to answer the questions. She tells you that she doesn't like thinking about what happened to her and doesn't think she will ever be ready to share with the group. Based on this information, do you think she's a good fit for your support group? So I'm going to launch the second poll. Or I will try to. There we go. Oops, sorry, I didn't realize I was still showing the other one. My bad. Now I'm going to launch the next one. Based on this information, do you think she's a good fit for your support group? Okay, I'm going to end the poll now, share the results. Okay, so from what the information we have now, again, everything within context, if we had room for more information, we might make a different decision. The answer is no, right? So, the purpose of a sexual violence support group is for people to share and mutually connect. For Bonnie, we might offer her other advocacy support services and recommend that she sign up for another group at a later date. We're not trying to change anyone's mind or make them share. That's not what we're trying to do. But instead, we want to remind Bonnie of the purpose of a support group and share that with her. And she doesn't have to be willing to share all the time, but they have to be able to work towards that, right? Because a support group is a place that people are willing to share and support. Not all the time. No one feels like sharing all the time, but they have to be willing to share. Bonnie has said that she does not feel like she's ever going to be ready to share. And so she might need to do some more work or take some time to reassess before she's ready to join the group. All right. And now we have our last scenario, scenario C. During a meeting with Claudine, she expressed that she would like to join your support group, but isn't a fan of being outside. Based on this information, do you think she's a good fit for your support group? Scenario C, Claudine. During a meeting with Claudine, she expressed that she would like to join your support group, but isn't a fan of being outside. Based on this information, do you think she's a good fit for your support group? The poll is now up. Oh, this one's interesting. Okay. The results are coming in. right. So, based on what we know about Claudine, we came to the answer of maybe, depending on if she's willing to participate in the group when it's outside. So, as the group facilitators, we should inquire more about her not wanting to be outdoors and see if there's support for that and we can offer, and that allow her to fully participate. So she might say, "Oh, I sunburn easily, right? Can we help her with that?" Or she says, "I have difficulty walking. Can we? Are there scooters or something that she can use while at the park, or some type of aid that we can get her so she's able to participate?" Or she just says, "No, I don't want to be outside." That answer might be a no, and that's okay. But the point is, we need to inquire more before coming into a decision. So, with that, and we are right at time, that is the end of our webinar today. I'm going to stay on to see if there are any questions, but I really appreciate everyone coming. Um, Anna is going to put the link to the evaluation and a copy of the slides again in the chat. And I thank you all so much. And let me know if you have any questions. All right, I'm not seeing any, but I'm going to stay on for maybe 2 more minutes just to make sure. Thank you all so much.